A night at the hotel, 4 haunted room stories that should never be revisited. Hotels are meant to be places of rest and refuge, but they also harbor stories that few dare to tell. Thousands of people pass through them each year, yet some never check out. Dark secrets lurk behind locked doors, ancient mirrors, and silent hallways where unseen presences roam unnoticed. Today, I bring you 4 terrifying tales of hotel rooms that should never be revisited. Get ready, because by the end, you'll never look at a hotel the same way again. And remember, not everything that appears empty is truly unoccupied. Story 1. The Mirror on the Other Side. Location: New Orleans, Louisiana. Claire was a financial consultant accustomed to constant travel. When she arrived at the Magnolia Hotel in the heart of New Orleans, everything seemed more than ideal. The historic charm, antique chandeliers and hallways lined with Victorian furniture exuded a welcoming atmosphere. Her room, number 214, was spacious, but something about it immediately unsettled her. Above the vanity hung a large mirror with an intricate golden frame. It seemed to have been there for centuries, reflecting stories no one dared to tell. Claire felt a chill the first time she walked past it, but she chalked it up to exhaustion. As night fell, however, that mirror seemed almost alive, as if it had a will of its own. She went to bed early, but awoke at 2 a.m. to a strange sound, a faint scratching coming from the direction of the vanity. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but as she opened her eyes, she noticed something unusual. The mirror was fogged, as though someone had breathed on it. Before she could react, she saw a hand appear in the reflection, slowly drawing a circle on the glass. The room itself was empty, yet the mirror revealed a shadowy figure, a man standing right behind her. He had no face, just a silhouette that seemed to hover. Claire spun around, but the room was empty. When she turned back to the mirror, it showed only her own terrified face. The next morning, Claire went to the reception desk to ask about the mirror. The receptionist's expression changed when she mentioned the room number. "Many guests have commented on that mirror," she said quietly. "Some say it belonged to a man who died here, obsessed with his own reflection. He would spend hours staring into the mirror, as if trying to communicate with something or someone." The explanation made Claire uneasy, but she convinced herself it was just psychological suggestion. The second night, however, things got worse. Around 3 a.m., Claire woke to a louder noise. It sounded like something being dragged across the floor. When she opened her eyes, she saw the vanity chair facing her, as if someone had sat there to watch her. The mirror, once again fogged, now displayed distorted words. "Help me." Claire froze, her heart pounding. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and she heard a deep breath, as though someone was standing right beside her. Without hesitation, she grabbed her belongings and ran to the door. But when she tried to turn the knob, it wouldn't budge. She began screaming for help, but the only response was the sound of the mirror cracking behind her. When she turned around, she saw the shadowy figure inside the glass, reaching out toward her. The cracks spread, as if the mirror was about to shatter. At that moment, Claire dropped to her knees, squeezing her eyes shut and praying for it all to be a nightmare. Finally, the door burst open and she bolted into the hallway, not stopping until she reached the reception desk. The clerk looked at her with a mixture of pity and fear. "You saw him, didn't you?" Claire didn't answer. She grabbed her suitcase and never returned to the Magnolia Hotel. Since then, Claire has avoided mirrors, especially at night, but sometimes, when she's alone at home, she feels it. For a fleeting moment, her reflection in the mirror seems to change, as though the man is still there on the other side, waiting for his next chance to cross over. Story 2. The Neighbor in the Empty Room. Location: Denver, Colorado. Paul was a seasoned traveler, but his stay at the Crescent Hotel in Denver would be unlike any other. The hotel had a modest appearance, yet there was something unsettling in the air, as if the hallways carried the weight of unresolved stories. He was assigned to room 310, which seemed ordinary at first glance. However, on his very first night, while reading a book, he heard knocking on the wall. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate, as if someone on the other side was trying to get his attention. Intrigued, he knocked back, but the sound stopped abruptly. Thinking it was just a guest in the neighboring room, Paul tried to ignore it and returned to his book. But at midnight, he heard something he couldn't explain, a low, deep laugh that seemed to emanate directly from the wall. The next morning, he mentioned the noise to the receptionist, who frowned. "Sir, no one is staying in the room next to yours. It's been vacant since an incident a few months ago." When Paul asked for more details, the receptionist averted her gaze, visibly uncomfortable. He didn't press further, but the unease lingered. On the second night, the knocking returned, louder this time, accompanied by whispers he couldn't decipher. The worst part came when the knocking turned into scratching, like nails dragging across the wall, growing louder and closer. Around 3 a.m., and Paul's door began to rattle, as if someone on the other side was trying to force their way in. He looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. When he returned to bed, he saw something that froze him in place. In the wardrobe mirror, there was a figure behind him. It was a man with a distorted face, sunken eyes, and a malevolent grin. Paul spun around instantly, but the room was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure had vanished, leaving only the imprint of a hand on the fogged glass. Panicked, Paul gathered his belongings and rushed to the front desk, demanding a room change. The receptionist hesitated, but eventually complied. However, that night in his new room, he heard the knocking again, this time coming from inside the wardrobe. When he opened the door, he found claw marks on the wood and a folded piece of paper on the floor. Unfolding it, he read a single, trembling sentence: "You can't escape." Paul left the hotel that very night and never returned. He later discovered that the adjacent room had remained vacant because years earlier, a guest had gone mad and attacked their neighbor. Since then, laughter and knocking had been reported by those staying along that corridor. Paul tried to move on, but sometimes in the dead of night, he hears knocking on the walls of his own home, as if the presence from the Crescent Hotel had followed him. Story 3. The Woman in the Hallway. Location: Boston, Massachusetts. Kate was in Boston for work, staying at a renowned luxury hotel. Known for its classic style and prime location, the hotel exuded sophistication, but to Kate, there was something faintly unsettling about the place. When she arrived at room 504, she felt an inexplicable chill. The walls seemed stifling, and the window overlooked a dark section of the interior courtyard. Brushing off the sensation, she focused on preparing for the next day. By 11 p.m., exhausted, she turned off the lights and went to bed. She'd barely closed her eyes when she heard footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, almost hesitant, pacing back and forth in front of her door. Thinking it was another guest, Kate got up and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. Annoyed, she returned to bed, but the footsteps continued, now accompanied by a faint murmuring, a low, constant sound, as if someone were talking to themselves. This time, she decided to open the door, only to find the corridor completely deserted. A strange chill ran down her spine, but she convinced herself the sound must have come from another floor. She went back to her room and locked the door. However, as she lay down again, she heard something even more unsettling, a light tapping on her window. That wouldn't have been unusual if her room weren't on the 5th floor. The next morning, Kate mentioned the incident to the housekeeper, who simply shook her head and muttered, "You were on the 5th floor. Strange things happen there." Intrigued, Kate pressed for more details. The housekeeper reluctantly shared that decades ago, a woman had died on that floor, her body found in the hallway just outside room 504. Her face had been frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Kate tried to laugh off the story, but that night, things took a turn for the worse. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps returned, now faster and more frantic. She saw a shadow pass under the sliver of light beneath her door and heard faint sobbing, as if someone was weeping on the other side. Terrified, Kate got up and approached the door again, but before she could open it, a low voice, almost a whisper, warned her, "Don't open it." The warning froze her in place. Trembling, she stepped back, But when she looked through the peephole, she saw something she would never forget. A woman with disheveled dark hair, dressed in a stained nightgown, standing in the hallway. Her face was turned away, but as Kate blinked, the woman slowly turned to face her. Her face was disfigured with hollow, vacant eyes, and her mouth moved as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Kate screamed and fell back, her heart pounding violently. She spent the rest of the night locked in the bathroom with all the lights on. At dawn, she packed her bags and left without explaining her reason to the front desk. Later, Kate learned that she wasn't the only one to report seeing the woman in the hallway. Many guests had described the figure, always accompanied by the sound of footsteps and murmurs. Since then, Kate avoids old hotels and, whenever traveling alone, always double-checks hallways before entering any room. Historia 4. Story 4. The Phone That Never Stopped. Location: Chicago, Illinois. Michael traveled frequently and was no stranger to odd hotels, but his stay at the Grand Bell Hotel in Chicago would be unlike anything he had ever experienced. Built in the 1920s, the hotel retained its classic appearance, but something about the atmosphere made him uneasy. He was assigned to room 601, a spacious and quiet corner of the building. After a long day, he was preparing to sleep when the room's phone rang. The sound was loud and insistent. Answering it, Michael heard only static, followed by a faint, distorted voice saying, "You shouldn't be here." Thinking it was a prank call, he hung up and tried to sleep. But the phone rang again. This time the voice sounded clearer. "You need to leave before it's too late." Michael slammed the phone down, now irritated, but as he glanced at the device, he noticed something chilling. It wasn't connected to the wall. The room seemed to darken suddenly, and an oppressive weight filled the air. He felt a presence, though nothing appeared out of place when he looked around. The phone stayed silent for the rest of the night, but Michael barely managed to sleep. The next morning, he mentioned the incident to a staff member, who gave him a concerned look. "Room 601. We've had unusual reports from there. Would you like to switch rooms?" Michael laughed it off, chalking it up to superstition, and declined. The second night, everything escalated. At 2 a.m., the phone rang again. When Michael picked it up, the same voice screamed, "Leave! There's no more time." The sound was followed by a loud pounding on the door. He rushed to open it, but the hallway was empty. When he turned back to the room, it felt colder, and he noticed the television had turned on by itself, displaying static. Amidst the static, a silhouette began to form, moving slowly toward the camera. Michael tried to turn it off, but the TV stayed on, the figure creeping closer with every second. Panicked, Michael grabbed the phone to call the front desk, but before he could dial, he heard heavy breathing on the other end. A low voice whispered, "Now you're ours." He dropped the receiver and ran to the door, but when he tried to open it, the knob wouldn't budge, as though something on the other side was holding it shut. Suddenly, violent banging began, and the room's lights flickered erratically. Finally, the door gave way, and Michael bolted down the corridor, never once looking back. Michael never returned to the Grand Bell Hotel. Later, he learned that room 601 had been infamous for strange occurrences since the 1930s, when a guest reportedly committed suicide there after receiving a mysterious phone call. Even now, Michael dreams of ringing phones, followed by that ominous voice, as though room 601 is still calling him back. These stories show that sometimes what we encounter in hotels goes beyond the expected. Behind locked doors and silent walls, there may be secrets that don't belong to our world. If you ever find yourself in a room where things feel off, perhaps it's best to trust your instincts. Don't ignore sounds in the middle of the night or strange reflections in the mirror. Sometimes, what we dismiss as superstition is actually a warning. And above all, remember, not every guest checks out. Not every presence is visible. And some stories, like the ones you heard today, serve as a reminder that the unknown may be much closer than we imagine. Until next time, if you have the courage to return. The stories you've heard today have been dramatized to heighten suspense and terror. They are intended to entertain and explore the deepest fears the unknown can evoke. While based on accounts, their accuracy may vary. However, remember, the line between reality and the supernatural is thinner than we think. Respect the places you visit, for what you cannot see may be watching.